Now, some analysts are saying there's still a long road ahead before South Africa is likely to leave the grey list. The country is put on the list of countries that are not fully compliant with anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism financing standards back in 2023. Now, according to some experts, the country still has to address many issues in order to be compliant. To discuss this further, I'm joined by Gary Allemann, who is the Managing Director at Master Data Management. Gary, one thing for sure, not so long ago, we just saw Capitec being put into receiving a fine then from the Reserve Bank because, of course, FICA regulations weren't adhered to there too. One of the big things South Africa had was its institutions. Is that becoming problematic? Are we falling by the wayside?
Well, I think that a lot of work has been done to resolve the issue. We've seen a number of banks that have been penalized in recent years, and Capitec, as you say, I also saw that article earlier this week or late last week. And then the biggest sort of casualty, if you like, of this regulation or the impact of the regulation has been Sasfin Bank, which has fundamentally been closed down as a bank. So no, we're not falling by the wayside. A lot of work has been done, but if we'd allowed things to continue, I think these fines really, and the public nature of these fines is a sign of the regulator and the government stepping in to ensure that the international community knows that they are taking these regulations seriously.
Are fines enough, though?
Well, it's a balancing act. It's really important to get back into FATF because the goal is to reduce complexities, is to make it easier for us to trade internationally. Because at the end of the day, the regulations are around being for us to be a trusted partner of those other members of FATF that we want to trade with, so we can move money, to the UK or to the US or to other markets. And what the grey listing has done is that it's created a lot more red tape, not just for us, but also for the people on the receiving end of money. So I think the government has done a lot. And from what I understand, there's 2 or 3 items that remain, on the list of items that need to be completed within the next year in order to get us back into the regime.
So it's still going to take some time then. I mean, has South Africa, do you think, learned from this? Because it doesn't feel like, however, we've put in any other regulations in place or strengthened a lot of our policies as we definitely should have. We've just increased the number of fines, for example, the regulator as well as the South African Reserve Bank perhaps becoming a little bit more stringent. Do we need an increase in policy, or does that just complicate the situation?
Well, we actually have seen quite a few increases in policy. I think anybody that's got a bank account, and in particular, people like myself that have a business and have a business banking account, will have seen that there's been a lot more information being requested. So what I said a few years back, when this whole thing started, was this is fundamentally a data problem. So what we've seen is changes to regulation in order to, for example, make it less easy to hide ownership of a business, ownership of, for example, in a trust. So what was happening is a lot of dubious characters or corrupt government officials, bluntly speaking, were hiding their ownership of businesses behind various illegal entities like trusts or in family names. So there's still work to be done in terms of being able to understand the relationships between, directors of companies and shareholders of companies, which is what, those relationships, for example, if they've been picked up by Sasfin, some of the fraudulent transactions that occurred in Sasfin might have been prevented. So I think governments and the regulator and largely the banking system have done a lot of work to actually make it more transparent, to understand that they can understand who they are dealing with, and so that they can start to draw connections between money moving out of the country and make sure that it's being used for the purposes and going to the people for whom it was stated on the form. So I think a lot has been done.
How significant and how important is the moment or the day that South Africa exits that grey list, particularly investments, security of South Africa's institutions, confidence as well in South Africa as a point of entry even for investments across the continent?
Look, I don't think it's going to be something that on day one after we hopefully get back into the whitelist, I don't think it's going to be an immediate reaction. But we're starting to see flows of capital back into the country. Part of that's obviously the result of the election and the fact that that was a peaceful transition into the new government. But what this will do is it will help to increase confidence. So at the moment, the market is dealing with, or we are dealing with as the business sector, are dealing with the sort of negative consequences of being grey listed. And as I said to you, most of those are actually administrative. It just means that every time there's a transaction, both the receiving bank and the sending bank, so the South African bank and the international bank, have to do FICA for the business that is sending the money, and that takes time and energy and it costs money. So it makes it less attractive for international businesses to do business with us, and it makes it more difficult for us to do business internationally. So this will just make everything easier. It should cut costs. It should cut red tape. So it will be significant.
Yeah, certainly for a country that certainly needs it, given previous past with electricity problems, water issues which may still be at bay, logistical constraints in some areas as well. This is certainly not one of those that we needed to kind of sit with as well in the doldrums. What can South Africa learn from this?
So I think the big lesson here is, it's not so much that we didn't have the laws in place prior to the grey listing. It's the fact that we weren't really enforcing the laws that we had. So I think what's important to understand is that these regulations are actually in place for a reason. And when they're there, it's important to be compliant. Often we see compliance as a checkbox item, as a tick box, and then once we get hammered, then we might even overreact. So what we can look at is, how do we automate? How do we make some of these processes that we're putting in place to FICA people more efficient, make it easier for people to get the information they need, but most importantly, that it is important that we sort of presenting to the international community that we're a trusted partner, that you want to do business in our economy, so that the economy can grow and we can create jobs, which I actually think is the biggest problem this country faces.
Yeah, it's certainly the one thing we definitely need right now. We don't need to remain in this grey list amongst some of our own problems, which you certainly need to be solving as well. Gary,
exactly.
Appreciate the time. Thank you so much. Festive season greetings to you as well.
You
Gary
too.
Allemann,
Have a good year.
Managing Director at Master Data Management.